a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrow.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country and around the world. We have plenty coming up, including strikes. Are we heading towards months more of industrial action? The war in Ukraine. How real is the threat of it turning nuclear? And wonky veg. Would you buy it? The farmers are desperate that you do, such is the state of play in that industry. We have all of that and so much more. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here's Tatiana.
Thanks very much, Alistair. It is 12 o'clock. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. For the first time in 3 decades, dock workers at Britain's busiest port have gone on strike in a dispute over pay. Nearly 2,000 union members at Felixstowe in Suffolk are walking out for 8 days. The port handles nearly half of all container freight that travels into Britain. Union workers recently rejected a 7% pay offer from their companies because they say it's too far below the rate of inflation. Well, Head of Corporate Affairs at the Port of Felixstowe, Paul Davies, says the strikes will prove costly for workers.
Unite, though, have declined. They refused to put the offer we've made to their members, their 1,900 members. They've had no say in this, and now they're having to go on strike. And that's going to cost each of them, you know, the thick end of sort of 900, £900 each in lost wages.
Barristers are voting on plans for an all-out strike next month in a row with the government over jobs and pay. Members of the Criminal Bar Association have already been walking out on alternate weeks in England and Wales. They're now deciding on whether to take uninterrupted industrial action that would start on the 5th of September. The ballot closes at midnight today, with the result expected tomorrow. Outgoing Prime Minister Boris Johnson has reportedly approved a multi-billion-pound deal for a new nuclear plant in Suffolk. Senior government sources say the choice to build the Sizewell C nuclear reactor happened several weeks ago without telling other ministers. The project will be funded primarily through private investment, but the government is expected to buy a 20% stake in the plant. The UK government's new free trade deal with New Zealand will be damaging to Scottish farmers, according to MSPs. The agreement will allow much higher quantities of produce from New Zealand to come into the UK without tariffs. But Scottish ministers warn the measures will cause a disadvantage for domestic farmers and are calling for greater safeguards, similar to the EU's restrictions. The deal will allow for 12,000 tonnes a year of New Zealand beef to come into the UK. In comparison, the EU has agreed for just over 3,000 tonnes across all 27 member states. Conservative leadership hopeful Liz Truss says she believes there's too much talk that there's going to be a recession. In an interview with The Sun on Sunday, the Foreign Secretary insists that an economic slump is not inevitable, despite warnings from the Bank of England. The central bank cautions the UK could face the largest recession since the 2008 financial crisis due to rising energy prices. If she becomes Prime Minister, Ms Truss plans to introduce immediate tax cuts, which she believes will spur growth of the economy. She's also promising a small business and self-employed revolution. The police watchdog is considering whether to investigate Scotland Yard after it emerged officers came into contact with student nurse Owami Davies after she was reported missing. The Met Police says they were called to an address in Croydon on July the 6th due to concerns over a woman's welfare, but she told them she didn't want help and they left. The interaction occurred before Essex Police handed the missing person case over to the Met on July 23rd. Ukrainian boxer Alexander Usyk has retained his heavyweight titles over Anthony Joshua in their rematch last night. The Brit was beaten on points in a split decision by judges. Following the loss, Joshua reacted angrily by tossing two of Usyk's belt out of the ring before shaking his hand and addressing the crowd with an emotional speech. Joshua later praised the Ukrainian.
I've got to give the man his credit because he's done well. It takes a lot to come up in weight, challenge, win the belt, defend the belt. He's good. He's really, really good. He's been doing it since a young age, had hundreds of amateur fights. He's a real deal. So well done to him. I'm happy for him.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Tatiana, thank you very much indeed. Well, indeed, as you just heard from Tatiana in her news bulletin, from action today at the port of Felixstowe to further disruption threatened on the railways, are we on the verge of a general strike? Has industrial action, not least because of the cost of living crisis, reached such levels that organised labour, the trade unions, and others like the Enough is Enough movement, could they combine to make it a national struggle, seeking ultimately to topple a democratically elected government, distracted, of course, by its own leadership election? Now, I wasn't around in the 1920s when this idea last intruded on the national agenda, but I was in the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s as an ITV industrial correspondent when such talk was commonplace. So, why are we talking about it today? Well, the rail network is a shambles, with the latest strike yesterday causing chaos for holidaymakers and indeed for football fans. The unions are planning more action. Post office workers will take their fourth round of industrial action over the August bank holiday weekend in an escalating row over pay that will overlap with strikes by workers at Royal Mail and BT. Teachers, nurses and others are also waiting in the wings. Now, by way of footnotes, the Labour Party is in a total mess over all of this, ordering top-ranked people not to go on picket lines and taking the whip away from those that ignore the edict, even if they happen to be friends of the deputy leader. The trade unions have nowhere near the numbers or the reach that they used to have in the 80s, in my day, but can still cause real chaos. And despite Mick Lynch, the rail union boss, and others becoming something of media celebrities, the current union leadership, to me, doesn't seem to be able to hold a candle to the intellectual and political giants of the old days, people like Jack Jones, Hugh Scanlon and Mick McGuckie. So it's a different set of circumstances, but the issues remain very similar. And that said, the anger is real. And the leadership contest in the Tory party, as I say, provides perfect timing. So I've invited a close friend of mine, Charles Ray, to join me. Now, you know him as the Sun's former royal correspondent. He's often on this programme in that capacity. But I first met him when he was the Sun newspaper's industrial correspondent in the 1980s, when he and I covered the steel workers and the miners' strikes under Margaret Thatcher. I'm also delighted to be joined by a new friend, Steve Headley. Steve's a former senior assistant general secretary of the RMT Rail Union. We, all of us, would also love to hear your thoughts on where we are and what the real challenges are. How has it all impacted on you? And do you have sympathy? Is there a better way for workers, businesses and government to settle these disputes? We'd really love to hear from union members and from folk who lived through the 1980s. Where are we now, and what do we think is going to happen next? So, email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk with any comments that you may have on those stories. We're also on Twitter, as indeed am I, and we are on Facebook. So let's get that conversation started with Charles, the former industrial editor of the Sun newspaper, and Steve Headley, the former Assistant General Secretary at the RMT. First of all, how similar, Charles, do you think what we're seeing at the moment is to what you and I reported on throughout the 80s?
Slightly similar, because you read out a litany of industrial action that's on the cards or about to be on the cards. So, yes, there's quite a lot coming up. We had a winter of discontent in 1979, as you know, which led to the fall of the Callaghan government and the election of Margaret Thatcher. I don't think we've got a winter of discontent coming. I think we have a summer of discontent, and I don't think it will have anywhere near the impact that it had in the 70s and the 80s. I say that because union membership is half of what it used to be. 13 million back then, 6 million now, and that is if you believe some of the union figures on paper. And also, the workforce today is a lot bigger than the workforce of the 70s. Yeah. Most of the industries that were, powerful unions' involvement have gone. We're now into the public sector and white-collar workers. The strikes that are happening now, we've also got new technology, which means an awful lot of workers do not have to wait for a train to get to work. They can just sit at home with their laptops and whatever else. We learned an awful lot through COVID that we could cope, and I think we will cope.
Yeah. Does that, and I mean, disagree with it if you will, but I'd go along with most of that analysis, and the only point I'd add to it is that in those days we were talking about smokestack industries like steel and coal. These are about transportation, about logistics, the ports and what have you. But is that analysis right, that the unions are not what they were in the 80s nowadays?
Well, look, there is some truth in it. That's undeniable. The union membership has declined massively since the 80s. But what we have here, we haven't got a conscious movement trying to overthrow a democratic government, as your introduction would have it. What we have is people who are forced into actually taking action because of cost of living crisis. Bills have gone through the roof. We have the utilities and the energy companies in particular making extortionate profits. We have a system capitalism that has to expand every year in order to survive, and that's with a planet with finite resources. So we are in the midst of an environmental crisis. And what we need is not government change, but system change. And that's trade unions will play a part in that. I think also you're going to have unorganised workers playing a part in that. And I think. Well,
let me butt in on that, because I mentioned Enough is Enough, a new movement, and there are one or two of the papers, and you might say they would, wouldn't they? But they're likening it to the Momentum movement that supported Jeremy Corbyn and that harder leftist view. But the real power in this land can be exerted when organised labour and other groups come together.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, to be fair, enough and enough is enough, and people like that are just trying to rehash sort of 1970s social democracy and repackage them and say this is a solution where it's obviously not. I think that we have to have workers' control in this country, a massive redistribution of wealth, and we have to have that worldwide in order to save not just the economy in this country, but in fact the planet.
When Steve was giving that analysis of it being a problem in his eyes and people who are like-minded to him in the trade union movement, that it's about the system, it's about capitalism, what have you. You and I heard Mick McGahey say that, Arthur Scargill say that. There was a crisp political analysis as well.
Yes, there was. And I think I agree with Steve. There is problems that we've got in this country that need to be sorted. I mean, the government at the moment is rudderless. We do not have a head of the government. We don't have a prime minister, which is part of the problem, which it is allowing, various unions take advantage is the wrong phrase, but to move their points forward, you know, like the rail workers.
But is it take advantage? I mean, is it purely coincidental and fortuitous, or would the likes of Mick Lynch, leadership of the RMT, have said, right, now's the time to go?
You've got 100... I don't think it's fortuitous. I think it's a complete coincidence. But the reality is you've got 160,000 people who are very much to the right of the general public in Britain, the average view, who are going to decide who the next Prime Minister is. So therefore you don't really have any level of honesty between Truss and Sunak. You've got them appealing to a very right-wing proportion of the electorate in order to get their position secured.
Yes.
So that's what's happening.
Charles?
Be fair, Steve. The same thing would happen if it was a Labour Party choosing a new leader. The unions would be involved in the voting for that leader, not people who are not members of the Labour Party.
The current leadership of the Labour Party be probably appealing to the same constituency.
Well, that was a moment that I wasn't expecting, but it takes me to the next thing that I did want to put to you, and that is a lot of people listening to this conversation. Both of you kick off whichever one you want to. Will have some sympathy with anyone who is struggling with the cost of living crisis, because they all are as well. But in terms of the politics of it, which you so succinctly spelt out, they say if they want to change the government, they'll do it at the general election. They'll do it when there's a vote. They don't want it forced upon them by either side. That's a real danger for the trade union movement.
Well, I honestly don't see the leadership of the trade union movement and their big salaries being prepared to take what actions necessary to bring down the government. I think that action would involve breaking the anti-trade union laws. And I think a lot of people, I don't see Francis O'Grady getting let off in cuffs for the cause. I really don't see that. I think it's going to be down to rank and file members of trade unions. They actually get out there, organise with community activists, organise a can't pay, won't pay campaign. With members of the general public who are not currently organised. If that's a way we're going to affect real change in this country, and if that brings the government down, so be it. We were supposed to have a democracy, not an elective dictatorship. Nobody voted in this government thinking they'd allow the fuel companies and the energy companies to have such extortionate profits. People will literally not be able to heat their houses in the winter. Working class people in the main, but also middle income people will be suffering from this. Nobody voted for that.
But that is everybody, not just union members. Everybody is facing the same problems, and you know the talks of general strike. I do not believe that union members or anyone else will support attempts for a general strike to try to bring down an elected government. I mean, there's already moves afoot of people being very, very upset that Boris Johnson was ousted by just a few MPs rather than facing the polls. And I'm not making a fan base for Boris Johnson or anything like that, but I'm just saying he was elected by the country. Yeah. He has been de-elected by just a handful of people. Yeah, because
let me go back, I'll come in on what he said, but let me add one other point to it, which I was hinting at in my introduction, and that is I do talk to a lot of people who do have sympathy, even with the rail workers, because they're trying to pay their bills as well, and the rail workers are saying, look, we're going to not work anymore unless we can get a decent cost of living rise. They sympathise with that. But if they can't get to see their favourite football match or take their kids out to Essex for a holiday weekend like this weekend, you can very easily lose that sympathy.
Look, public sympathy is a wonderful thing, but if it all depended on public sympathy, the nurses would be really well paid and the politicians would be on the minimum wage. It doesn't. It depends on industrial strength and the concrete situation that people find themselves in. And the reason we're getting, the railway workers are getting massive support is because everybody else is in the same boat. Every other working class person, and perhaps even middle class person who's out there, is in the same boat. They see an inflation going through the roof. Wages are being suppressed. They've been suppressed for over a decade. In the last 3 years, because we had a 2-year pay freeze on the railways, and now we have inflation at 10.1%, we've seen real wages reduced by a fifth. People have lost 20% of their spending power. They're not going to continue to do that.
And most of the support you're getting is coming through new technology on Twitter, because as opposed to way back in the 70s, people would just turn up on a picket line to show the support or toot their horns. I'm sure they're still tooting their horns today. But if you look at Twitter and you talk about particularly the rail workers, there is a lot of support for the rail workers by members of the public who I'm assuming are not members of the RMT. So that is the way that they're doing it in the support.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's a lot of misrepresentation still in the mainstream media. I mean, I picked up on your screen outside that the rail workers were offered 8%. They haven't been offered 8%. What they've been offered is a deal over 2 years that delivers 8%. Now, we don't know. We have no idea what inflation is going to be next year, but I doubt it's going to be 0%. You know, Bank of England forecasts are 13% by the end of this year. So that would mean, in effect, a real terms pay cut over 2 years. Who in their right mind would actually agree to a deal like that when inflation's out of control?
And sure.
Let me just add something, because I think that is intriguing, and Barry Gardiner made the same point on Arlene's programme just a moment ago when we were chatting about it. And I put to Barry, and he kind of smiled and took it on board, I think, that in the current system, of which you were very lucidly critical of earlier, the government or the rail companies might be tempted to say, OK, fine, I'll give you 13%, but there will only be 80% of you left compared to the 100% who we currently employ. That's a real dangerous trade-off in the current climate for you guys.
Well, I mean, they're not even offering that. They're not even offering to have an inflation-proof pay rise. But the reality is everything is being made conditional on thousands of job cuts, which people will say, well, OK, if that's not done compulsory, if that's done voluntarily, then that's OK. But it's not, because what it'll mean is that the people left behind, their work-life balance will be absolutely destroyed. These are people who already work shifts. Now, the proposals the companies are putting forward is 39 weeks of nights and 39 weekends. I mean, if you see your children at weekends, I mean, what does that leave? 10 weeks a year or 12 weeks a year you can actually see your kids? It's nonsense, and people won't accept it.
So you're right about what the rail companies have offered the RMT, but I would say to Mick Lynch and the negotiating team, get back round that table and work out what's going to be paid over the 2 years, and also let's get started to talk about what the companies want in terms of reorganisation or modernisation or whatever it is you want to call it.
Again, I'm going to grab that point and throw it back to both of you as well. So if I was Mick Lynch, I would think I've gone from virtually nothing to 2% to now 13%, albeit over 2 years, as Steve Wright.
8% over 2 years.
OK, but I'm still going to think, as the leadership of ASLEF or the RMT or any of those big industrial unions, we've got them on the run. A bit more strike action, we'll have a bit more on the table.
I'm not a big fan of Mick Lynch, right? But he hasn't walked away from the negotiating table. He's still there at the negotiating table. In fact, these talks have been taking place in various bodies, Rail Industry Coronavirus Forum and various bodies for 3 years. I mean, no one just walks out and goes, right, that's it, 2 minutes notice, we're all on strike. There has been a process that people have followed. And they've only got to this situation because the government, actually, you have to have sympathy for the devil in the train operating companies and Network Rail, because the government are limiting their bargaining power. We've got the worst of all worlds. We nominally have a privatised system which is being actually bombarded and paid for by the taxpayer. Avanti, for example, have just paid out 11 million to their shareholders, and they've got 17 million off the government. The government may as well pay the shareholders. But reality is these companies can't negotiate because the government are putting the limits on their negotiations. And then Lynch and the negotiating team are going into the negotiations, and the companies are going, well, you have to speak to the government because they put a limit on us. And the government are going, not our problem, speak to the company.
Sure, but my point is that Grant Shapps' main contribution in the last 72 hours has been... Well, no, I was glad they took the wide shot at that point. It is to say, put what is on the table. You said get rack around the table. Yeah. The Transport Secretary says, put what is on the table now to the membership of the trade union and let them determine whether they think it's good, bad or indifferent, not just the leadership. That's democratic, isn't it?
Well, that's all right. Well, if that's what they're saying, then put what's on the table in the Tory party leadership to the country, call a general election. People are elected. It's a representative democracy to make representative decisions. So Mick Lynch and the leadership just don't go, well, we think that's a bad offer. They consult with the reps. The reps are elected by the members.
But isn't this the same problem at Felixstowe, where the strike has started today? Those 1,900 guys have been offered 8%. And they've said, no, they won't put it to they won't put it to their membership. But there's 500 clerical staff at the docks at Felixstowe have accepted the same deal.
Well, the reality is no trade union makes a decision without consulting its membership. Whatever they do, well, hold on. You know as well as I do, there's more than one form of consultation. It's not always a direct democracy, OK?
Right.
There's a representative democracy. People elect a local rep. Local reps elect senior reps. And all those people are talked to get a flavour of what the membership feel in order to actually make a decision. Yeah. No one goes, all right, we don't like that. They consult the representatives first. Now, if the representatives are out of tune, the members will soon let them know.
Yeah.
Because, you know, this idea that you've got these union leaders, or barons as they like to be called, no hereditary lordships in the trade union movement, by the way, we're all elected. So these people come along and the membership tell us when they want to go on strike and how long they want to go on strike for. It would be absolutely fantastic if people could give up and write 6 months all out, but you can't. The membership have to tell you what to do.
We've got about 2 minutes left, and I want to just add one final thought, and I'd love to hear what you both think about it. And apart from Charles and I standing reporting on picket lines endlessly during the 80s, we also stood endlessly outside a thing called ACAS, the Arbitration Conciliation Service. In your view, is there any hope at all of an outside party? You've made it very clear what you think of the government, and I respect that and I hear it, and of the ownership of the rail companies. But is there any role for an independent body to come in and say, look, we just got to get these goods moving through the country, we've got to get people using the trains back to work?
I think there's always room for any outside body to come in and have a fresh look. I don't see ACAS, which is a government-funded body, actually to be a particularly independent body. But the reality is this: I think we have to get away from the notion that you can't take action and negotiate at the same time. And that's what the employers put the gun to the heads of the trade unions and say, well, we're not going to negotiate with you when you're taking action. I think there's room for both. I think you can go in when the action's on and you can negotiate at the same time. And I think if that's on the table, I think people should take up that offer.
Final thought, Charles?
Well, I think you're right. I think there should be a body of some description. I understand what Steve's saying about ACAS being sort of government quango, so to speak. But surely there's got to be enough brains around for a body to be formed that's not on the side of the unions or on the side of the government or even on the side of the rail company.
Or even just make an assessment that we've got as far as we're going to get. Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
We have to leave it there. I've so enjoyed it, and I hope people at home, I mean, they may agree or disagree with what either or all of us have said, and I hope very much that you will let us know. But Steve, great to meet you. You're welcome back any time. Thank you very much indeed. Charles, always a pleasure, whether it's the royal family or the state of British industry and the trade union movement. You too are always welcome back. Thank you, gentlemen, very much indeed. Charles Ray there, former industrial editor of The Sun, and Steve Headley, the former Assistant General Secretary of the Rail and Maritime Union. Used to be the NUR until they merged with the Merchant Navy workers as well. So there we are. Thanks, gents, very much indeed. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and coming up we will be discussing Anthony Joshua. Is it all over for him after his defeat last night, or is there more in him? We shall see. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking dry for many, although cloud and rain begins to move into the southwest. Let's take a look at the details. It will be a better afternoon across Scotland than yesterday, with a mix of sunny spells and some scattered showers, especially in the north and west. Winds will also be lighter. Northern Ireland also having a fine afternoon, with much of the country dry with some spells of sunshine and just the odd shower. The best of the sunshine this afternoon, though, will be across northern England, although the odd light shower can't be ruled out across the Pennines. Wales, on the other hand, will be rather cloudy and grey with some outbreaks of rain, especially in the south. It will also be rather murky around the south coast, but with feeling increasingly humid. The Midlands will see a mix of sunshine and a few showers, especially across the north. Skies in the south, on the other hand, will turn increasingly hazy with highs of 23 Celsius. Much of East Anglia, though, will have a dry afternoon with some decent spells of sunshine. The sunshine may be hazy at times, but it will be feeling warm. Southeast England also having a dry afternoon, but further west, it will be increasingly cloudy and humid with some patchy rain moving into the southwest throughout the afternoon. This evening, we'll then see cloud and rain in the southwest spread northeastward, but much of the north remaining dry, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, it is 12:30. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. For the first time in 3 decades, dock workers at Britain's busiest port have gone on strike in a dispute over pay. Nearly 2,000 union members at Felixstowe in Suffolk are walking out for 8 days. The port handles nearly half of all container freight that travels into Britain. Barristers are voting on plans for an all-out strike next month in a row with the government over jobs and pay. Members of the Criminal Bar Association have already been walking out on alternate weeks in England and also in Wales. They're now deciding on whether to take uninterrupted industrial action that would start on the 5th of September. The police watchdog is considering whether to investigate Scotland Yard after it emerged officers came into contact with student nurse Owami Davies after she was reported missing. The Met says they were called to an address in Croydon on July 6th due to concerns over a woman's welfare, but she told them she didn't want help and they left. The interaction occurred before Essex police handed the missing person case over to the Met on July 23rd. Heavyweight boxer Tyson Fury has called on the government to tackle knife crime after he says his cousin died in an incident last night. While posting on social media, the world champion said knife crime was a pandemic in the UK and he called for higher sentencing for those convicted of carrying a weapon. He also paid tribute to his cousin Rico Burton, wishing him a good place in heaven. Ukrainian boxer Alexander Usyk has retained his heavyweight titles over Anthony Joshua in their rematch last night. The Brit was beaten on points in a split decision by judges. Following the loss, Joshua reacted angrily by tossing 2 of Usyk's belts out of the ring before shaking his hand and addressing the crowd with an emotional speech. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Tatiana, thanks very much indeed. Welcome back. It's 28 minutes to 1. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News. First thing this morning, about 6 o'clock when I got up, before going to get the papers, I wrote down 2 things on my little notebook. One was Felixstowe, the other was AJ. The poster boy of British boxing, Anthony Joshua, choked back tears after losing his heavyweight world title rematch with the Ukrainian boxer Alexander Usyk in Saudi Arabia last night. In his emotional press conference, Anthony Joshua was asked about the outburst after the match, but declined to answer. However, he did answer a question on his future and the possibility of a fight with Tyson Fury.
Look, when you lose, you're not ultimately happy. It's just upsetting. I really wanted to win, and I wanted to win for Great Britain because I know how much they wanted me to fight Tyson Fury. So I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for like the whole nation. So I was just so upset. So I'm not so happy with the performance because I didn't win.
Well, joining me in the studio now is a good friend of mine and GB News sports expert. I had that with Liz Truss in Manchester. I'm not going there again. Aidan McGee is with me now. First things first, and he touched upon it, and it was within the package, and you discussed it with the other team earlier on. What do you think objectively is his future, or is that it? Is he done and dusted?
I don't think he's done and dusted. No, I think at the age of 33. These days, considering 30 years ago we saw George Foreman go into his early 40s, yeah, he was a bit on his last legs, but he never got knocked over. I think we've reached a point where 33 for a heavyweight is actually quite young. So I don't think we've seen the last of him. I think in terms of his actual performance, I think that was a really creditable performance last night. Ultimately, Usyk was too far out of range, literally, in terms of class as well. But he had him on the ropes a few times, he asked questions, he advanced to the centre of the ring. He was mobile, he was nimble, he looked focused, his movement was very good. He looked sharper. I mean, he was carrying 4 pounds extra weight compared to when they fought the first time in September. But he moved much better than I've seen him move in quite a long time. It was going back to the, reminiscent of Joshua in 2016, 17, 18, before the first fight with Andy Ruiz. And so I don't think it's over for him. I think they're a very marketable. He's a very marketable athlete. We've seen that over a number of years. I worked closely with him in his early years at Sky. And so he was marketed, he was managed over a number of years. I did look back in that period and wonder who he actually fought. I remember being at one fight with, it was ahead of Dominic Brazil, and I'd never heard of this guy. And someone said to me, look, if you're in any doubt as to who the calibre of the opponent, speak to the bloke from the Boxing News. And so I spoke to the person from the Boxing News, and he said, I've never heard of him. Yeah. So we were told Dominic Brazil was a calibre opponent. Anthony Joshua fought too many of those in his early years. You could say now, well, he hasn't fought Wilder, he hasn't fought Fury, and yet he's still got 3 losses on his record. How good is he really? Yeah. But last night he was really decent. I thought that he probably sullied his night by what happened after.
Let me move it on to precisely that, because that was a crisp, authoritative analysis of the sport that actually took place, in the noble art within the ring. But I first met him, and I've only interviewed him once in my life, which was after the London Olympics, when he was a hero. Bright young guy, turned his life round, had been a tricky start, won medals and stuff like that. And the brand was, this is a good guy. That was not a good guy last night.
No, it didn't look like him. I mean, look, let me give you an idea of where he came from. I knew him back in 2015. That's when Sky, in conjunction with a few other parties, including Matchroom, began managing his appearances and boosting his profile post-Olympics. He wasn't actually sure, he wasn't actually confident of his ability in the early years. He actually rang me. We got on really well, and he rang me to ask me about investing in property. And we had a long conversation about it, and I was going to get him involved in it. He was going to make it a business transaction, because he said to me, I'm only actually 1 punch away from being floored, and this is the end of my career. I mean, he said 1 punch, but I mean, it could, in some cases, in more extreme cases, it's even worse. It can be brain damage, it can be death. It's happened before in boxing, there's no question about that.
But is that an indication of self-doubt as well?
I think so, because you think, well, if you think, I mean, he made £33 million last night, so he clearly wasn't thinking back in 2015 that he had the ability to do that. So you have to, he referenced it in the speech afterwards. He said, look, I didn't start boxing until I was 18. It's not like Fury and Usyk, who've been doing it since they were 5 years old. It was never in my blood. I turned my life around. I was a young offender. Yeah. People forget that. He had involvement in drugs and things like that. Yeah. So one of the first questions I asked him, one of the first other questions I asked him back in 2015, first time I interviewed him, was, are you too nice to be a heavyweight boxer? There's enough devilment inside you. And he said, trust me, I've got the killer instinct if I need it. And so you can't say he's not had a good career. I think there's more to come. The Fury fight, if it happens, he was asked about it last night, it's still it will still sell tickets, and that will ultimately govern whether it takes place. The timing, I couldn't tell you on. It could happen within 2 years. You don't want a situation where Mayweather and Pacquiao fought in, 2015. That fight should have happened 6 years before. More recently, you saw Kell Brook and Amir Khan. That should have happened 10 years ago. Timing is important in this. We want to see it when they're both somewhere near their peak. We don't want to see it when they're both 47. You know, that just becomes a bit of a Punch and Judy, really.
In terms of the...
But there's sorry, just to refer, there's Deontay Wilder's still out there. He's in a similar position to Joshua. To get those two in the ring together, it would sell tickets. It may even pack a stadium.
But of that whole list of people, Fury and AJ are the charismatic figures in this marketplace.
In the British marketplace,
yes. Globally, what you had in Saudi Arabia last night was a rerun of the Eurovision Song Contest.
Yeah, effectively.
Where everybody's favourite, who isn't a Brit, won.
Yeah, exactly.
Ukraine won.
Usyk's hugely charismatic. He's been fighting in a war since in between these two fights. And it's not like they fought 5 years ago. They fought last September. He's been fighting in a war since then. Yeah. And he's also proved his talent. I mean, Usyk's movement, his dexterity, the speed of his hands. I mean, you've got to hand it to the man. I mean, he fought a real good challenge last night from Joshua, and yet still he was able to stay ahead of him. People ask me, can he beat Fury? Yes, he certainly can beat Fury. No question about that. I wouldn't have him as my favourite right now. But he's going to ask some serious questions. He's going to ask some serious questions of Fury that perhaps he's never had before. I think Fury's sheer size, given that he's probably going to be carrying 2 or 3 stone more, and he's got the height advantage, might push it in his favour. But either way, that's the one. If you'd asked me even a month ago or even a year ago, that's the one since Tottenham, since last September when Usyk beat Joshua quite comfortably the first time round. That's the one that I want to see. Real fight fans want to see Usyk against Fury, and that could happen within a year.
Final quick question. I hadn't realised before this conversation how well you knew him and the setup around him. What does he do right now? And it's not a career planning, strategic question. It's genuinely, go back home, put your head down, keep quiet, chill out for a while.
He needs to convalesce. He needs to, because
physically as well as mentally.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's in great shape. Don't get me wrong. As I say, that's the best I've seen him in shape since probably Klitschko, which was 2016. He got a bit complacent after that. I mean, we saw Ruiz, who was, all of 5'9" or whatever, came in completely out of shape. He was a standing opponent, and he absolutely wiped the floor with Anthony Joshua. And I think that played on his mind mentally for a number of years. But I thought last night, he left that all aside. There was nothing troubling him mentally last night. He went in there, he gave it his best shot. Alistair, he just was not quite good enough. But that doesn't mean he can't beat Wilder. It doesn't mean he can't still establish himself among one of the greats. You can be a great without being the greatest.
Great word to end on. Those of us old enough to remember not only Muhammad Ali, but even Cassius Clay.
Indeed.
Great to see you, Aidan. Thank you very much indeed. Sports broadcaster and journalist Aidan McGee. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come this afternoon, including the latest on the war in Ukraine, as we celebrate or note 6 months since, I didn't mean celebrate, note 6 months since Russia invaded. But first, we're going to take a quick break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's coming up to 1:15, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. Yesterday, we had what I thought was a great conversation with Nick Gowing and Admiral Chris Parry about what's going on in Ukraine, what's happened in the last 6 months and where it may be going. Both of them, if you remember rightly, said that there was no end in sight and that the threat of nuclear war was real. Well, I've invited two good friends of mine back onto the programme because it's a conversation that needs continuing. Elizabeth Braw is Senior Fellow, Foreign and Defence Policy at the American Enterprise Institute, and Major General Chip Chapman is the former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, and they are going to continue that conversation. Elizabeth, let me first put that question to you, whether or not you share Nick and Chris's view that this is going to be an autumn-winter stalemate, but a period during which Putin will contemplate upping the ante.
I share that view, and I think that the risk is that the ante will be upped, even if that's nobody's intention, including Putin's intention. And it's, of course, an extremely dangerous situation we are seeing there at the nuclear power plant. I remember, in fact, one of my most vivid memories of my childhood is waking up one morning when my grandmother called to say there had been an accident at Chernobyl, which was, of course, was a town nobody in Western Europe knew, but the Swedish nuclear power plant had detected the radiation, because, of course, the Soviets kept it quiet. And that was a defining moment of the Cold War. It was an accident. And I think what we should all worry about is that the standoff at the nuclear power plant in Ukraine that we are all worrying so much about could turn into an accident. So through nobody's ill intentions, even though the Russians are clearly not there with good intentions.
A false flag accident.
Any range of options.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think we should all be really concerned about.
Chip Chapman, same question again, but with an add to it. I.e., do you share the views of Nick and Chris yesterday about a stalemate, but with Putin threatening to up the ante? And the second bit, because you will know, is will our intelligence services, both military and civilian, know what might be in the Kremlin's mind right now?
Well, the first thing is I always go back to the predominant intelligence community, which is the Americans, and Admiral Haynes, who runs the Defence Intelligence Agency, said in the end of June, and has been proven correct, that the grinding struggle would go on, that the Russians would struggle to overtake the Donbass, which is being proven to be correct, and that we'd see limited counterattacks from the Ukrainians in Kherson and in the south, which is also seen to be correct, and that, more importantly, that this war will go on for some time. So I think Admiral Haynes, of course, is correct. In terms of escalation for the future, you can escalate in 7 ways. You can escalate by weapons, targets, objectives, rhetoric, which we've seen the Russians do a number of times, domains, including cyber and space, geography, or mobilization. Now, I think, again, going back to when Admiral Haynes was with Lieutenant General Scott Berrier, who used to work with me, in March, they said in the House Armed Services Committee that there was a grim assessment that if there was a protracted struggle, then Putin was likely to make nuclear threats, because that reflected the Russian doctrinal view on the use of tactical non-strategic weapons to compel an adversary to bend to your will. And of course, all wars are fought for political objectives. That doesn't mean just because it's a doctrinal view that it is something that they will do. But the use of threats is something which would also be used to try and bend the will of the West, because one of the things that Putin is relying on is that the West will tire of the support for Ukraine. And we've seen that in really the last few weeks in that he already played the hunger card. That didn't work because of the reaction of the Middle East and Africa. He may well play the cold card in Europe when the winter comes. And of course, now he's trying to play the nuclear card, and amplified in the information domain by the knowledge today that they say that some of the Russian soldiers around the nuclear power plant have gone down with some strange biotoxin wounds, which they are going to take the Ukrainians to the OPCW. That is all designed to sow doubt in the minds that Ukraine are the bad guys, when in fact they're not the bad guys, they're the good guys.
Chip touches on a broader palette there than simply nuclear, but the first big war that I was involved in as a reporter was the first Gulf War. And we used to have to wear things that were called NCB suits. And that stood for nuclear, chemical and biological. You've talked about a hit on the nuclear power plant. Chip's talked about that as well, be it dressed up as an accident or a conscious decision. But unfortunately, the armoury is nastier, dirtier than just the evil of nuclear weapons, isn't it?
Alistair, I remember a few years ago I was seated at the dinner next to a professor of medicine at Harvard University, and he said, well, you know, this stuff that you're writing about, yeah, we should worry about that, but if I were Putin, I would put a bunch of prisoners, Russian prisoners, on an airplane and fly them to the UK, TB-infected Russian prisoners. As we all know, tuberculosis is rampant in Russian prisons. We don't have a tuberculosis problem here in the West. We would have one if Putin landed an airplane with full of TB-infected Russian prisoners. So it's just to say that he can use many more tools. Of course, at the moment there are no direct flights from Russia anyway, but no direct commercial flights. But he can use many more tools, and that's why we should be prepared for more disinformation, more provocations, including, for example, members of our own society who could be influenced by Russia. And we should remember that now it's a very tense time, not just in the UK, but in every Western country. Because we are all extremely concerned about lots of things, including the cost of living and of course, energy prices.
Chip, let me bring you back in on that in terms of timing as well, because Zelensky in his regular broadcast last night talked about fears of a spectacular, language that people will recall very vividly from the bad days of the IRA struggles in the United Kingdom. The IRA used to like a spectacular when minds needed to be focused. Given the anniversary of the invasion itself and also the anniversary of Ukraine independence, should we be sharper? Should we be more alert? Or are we quite alert enough? Thank you very much.
No, I think the intelligence community are very alert to everything that's going on. And I think there's a number of taboos which the Russians will have to think twice before they cross. The nuclear taboo is, of course, the predominant one. And there's a calculation there for them to take as well, because if they cross that taboo, the ones who sort of support them in a vague way, China and India, for example, may say that that's a step too far and warn Putin against that. Now, there are lots of tools in the armory, but at the moment, the chance of a nuclear attack, I would say, goes in intelligence terms, because we talk about probability yardsticks, into the 5 to 20% category. That is highly unlikely. That, as I said earlier, doctrinally they might want to do it, but doctrine and reality are often two different things.
Elizabeth.
I completely agree with General Chapman that the UK government is well prepared, in the intelligence community in particular. But they are not the only ones that have to be prepared. The rest of us have to be prepared, so that when Putin comes with another, the General talked about verbal escalation, when Putin verbally escalates again, the rest of us have to be prepared too, or otherwise we'll have a prepared government that does what the government does, and the rest of us, meaning the rest of society, being frightened, panicked, and acting perhaps irresponsibly as a result. And there are lots of incidents. We remember, for example, when COVID struck, people responded by stocking up on loo roll, of all things. And when Colonial Pipeline was attacked in the US, people responded not by conserving fuel, but by buying as much as possible to look after themselves. Completely the wrong answer.
I want to end on that, curiously enough, and I'd written a question down about that, but Elizabeth brings me to it sooner. So let me put it back to you, Chip, if I may, and that is, you mentioned in passing about public interest in and public support for the plight of the Ukrainians, not only in this country, but more generally within the West. But when food and energy become weapons of war, which is a direct result of this conflict, then Joe and Joanna Public begin to scratch their heads and get a bit nervous, and maybe will move slightly more to the camp that says, come on, let's try and settle this thing, because we're peckish and the lights are going off.
That's true. For all their altruism, people actually react in a selfish manner at the end of the day. What I would say is there's actually a slight paradox here at the moment. Ukraine is a democracy. There is no notion at the moment of land for peace because 89% of the Ukrainians think that they should regain their sovereignty. Interestingly, because it is not a democracy and Russia is authoritarian dictatorship, Putin could end this war tomorrow if he wanted by saying we will settle for the Donbass. Now, I'm not saying that is what would be acceptable to the Ukrainians, but because he is in a dictatorship, he controls the media. And as Napoleon said, he would rather have a newspaper in his back pocket than a division of troops. So Putin could have an off-ramp anytime he wanted. If Russia finishes fighting, the war is over. If Ukraine finishes fighting, Ukraine is finished.
Chip Chapman, great to talk to you. Final word to Elizabeth on that. We've kind of gone slightly full circle, which is exactly what I wanted to achieve. And just with those words from Chip ringing in your ear, what the public think and the degree to which the public are prepared to back their democratically elected governments does matter in war and does matter in conflict.
It does matter, but you can't, as the government, you can't wait until the crisis is there to tell the public about what sort of crises, contingencies, uncomfortable situations may come our way. You have to prepare them so that when the crisis comes, people don't panic, people don't blame the government, and in fact step up and do that part. The World War II generation was nothing. They were not an unusual generation. They were just asked to do more, and the government prepared them for what they had to do. And we can do the same thing again.
Having been told for far too long that peace was possible. Elizabeth, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Elizabeth Moore here with me live in the studio, Senior Fellow in Foreign Defence Policy at the American Institute. And still there, I hope, but so he can hear my courtesies, Major General Chip Chapman. There he is, former Head of Counter-Terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. Thank you both very much indeed. Have a great weekend. Thank you. Now, it has been, and we sort of alluded to it very slightly there at the end, a difficult year for British farmers with spiralling input costs, not least because of the war in Ukraine. Fertilisers is one of the things that's really hit them hard. There are also labour shortages and, of course, something that's affected all of us, and that is the drought. The hot, dry weather has had such an impact on crop yields that supermarkets and indeed consumers are being urged to buy more Wonky and misshapen fruit and vegetables. Farmers got the chance to put their questions and concerns to the Tory leadership hopeful Rishi Sunak this week at a hustings held by the National Farmers Union. Well, to find out how it went, I'm delighted to be joined now by Tom Bradshaw, who is the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union. Always good to see you. Before we come to that, and I'm not going to try and tempt you into say whether you support one or the other, because that's not what you're here for, and I'm sure many of your members would take one view or the other. But what I really do want to do is go back to that opening assertion in my introduction to our conversation, and that how are things going at the moment within the agricultural sector?
Well, as you highlight, we've had a pretty challenging season. I mean, the energy prices were high, and then the war in the Ukraine has taken them to another level. Fertilizer price now is 3 times as high as it was this time last year. And then that's all been compounded by the drought. And there isn't a sector of agriculture that isn't affected, whether you're livestock and dairy producers who rely on the grass growth. You're now using your winter feed, and that's making it pretty precarious for the winter, whether or not you're going to have enough feed to get through the winter. And then our horticultural growers that are producing the vegetables that we buy from the retail shelves have been using their irrigation right since the beginning of June, and many of their reservoirs are now running empty. So we needed an ideal growing season to try and minimise the impacts of the crisis over in the Ukraine. And unfortunately, we've had the opposite, which really is creating a pretty challenging environment.
And both my guests, Elizabeth, who's still here, and Chip, who was down the line, and my two guests yesterday were saying there's no early end to the Ukrainian situation in prospect, so fertilisers will remain very, very expensive. That's going to mean that for me and everybody else listening to our conversation, yields will be lower, prices will be higher.
But yields will definitely be lower, but we've also seen a reduction in demand since the peak during COVID, when a lot of people started cooking from home, and obviously the out-of-home market was completely shut, and there was a real surge in vegetable demand. What we've actually seen since then is that there has been a relative drop in demand, and what the question is now is, well, what will the demand be, and will we be able to fulfil that demand without simple economics taking hold and prices increasing? And that's one of the reasons we've been urging retailers to relax the specification of the contracts, so we can minimise the amount of wastage at the farm level. Potatoes, onions are going to be smaller in size. Carrots might be a bit wonky and might not have the skin finish. But actually, they're all perfectly edible. They taste just the same. And I think that we need to maximise that flexibility to minimise food wastage and the inflationary pressure that goes with it.
I love that. The language that you use there cuts to the chase about the specifications that the supermarkets demand. Cucumber has to be absolutely straight and narrow, and a King Edward potato has to be perfectly orbital. And perfectly good stuff out there not being sold to us. And if you bake a potato, you don't care what shape it is. And if you slice a cucumber, you don't care what shape it is. How much do you think it's costing the industry because the supermarkets are so prissy about it?
Well, I think we've all been conditioned by the retailers to expect everything to look perfect on the shelf. And as we all know, in nature, things don't grow perfectly, and especially during a very challenging season like this. In a normal year, there'd be small percentages of wastage, but this is far from normal. And if that flexibility isn't there, then I think that's when we're really going to see a lot of the price pressures take a grip. We know potatoes are going to be critically affected, the unirrigated potatoes in particular. And so it is crucial that we see that flexibility. Our members need to see fair returns so we can afford to invest in next year's crops, producing the food for next year and beyond. And energy prices are 3 times higher as well. And for anyone who's been using irrigation, the electricity bills are just astronomical for pumping that water around the farms.
Tom, great to talk to you, and good luck with wonky vegetables. I have no problem with them at all, and if the prices remain nice and low, that would help as well. But seriously, good luck to you personally as a farmer, but also to the sector. Thanks for finding time for us this afternoon. Tom Bradshaw there, the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've lots more to come in the second hour of the programme this afternoon, including your thoughts on the strike action that is beginning to dominate the summer months. But first, we're going to take a quick break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon. It is 2 minutes past 1. I am Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. For the first time in 3 decades, dock workers at Britain's busiest port have gone on strike in a dispute over pay. Nearly 2,000 union members at Felixstowe in Suffolk are walking out for 8 days. The port handles nearly half of all container freight that travels into Britain. Union workers recently rejected a 7% pay offer from their companies because they say it's too far below the rate of inflation. Head of Corporate Affairs at the Port of Felixstowe, Paul Davey, says the strikes will prove costly for workers.
Unite, though, have declined. They refused to put the offer we've made to their members, their 1,900 members. They've had no say in this, and now they're having to go on strike. And that's going to cost each of them, you know, the thick end of sort of £900 each in lost wages.
Barristers are voting on plans for an all-out strike next month in a row with the government over jobs and pay. Members of the Criminal Bar Association have already been walking out on alternate weeks in England and Wales. They're now deciding on whether to take uninterrupted industrial action that would start on the 5th of September. The ballot closes at midnight today with the results tomorrow. Outgoing Prime Minister Boris Johnson has reportedly approved a multi-billion-pound deal for a new nuclear plant in Suffolk. Senior government sources say the choice to build the Sizewell C nuclear reactor happened several weeks ago without telling other ministers. The project will be funded primarily through private investment, but the government is expected to buy a 20% stake in the plant. The UK government's new free trade deal with New Zealand will be damaging to Scottish farmers, that's according to MSPs. The agreement will allow much higher quantities of produce from New Zealand to come into the UK without tariffs. But Scottish ministers warn the measures will cause a disadvantage for domestic farmers and are calling for greater safeguards similar to the EU's restrictions. The deal will allow for 12,000 tonnes a year of New Zealand beef to come into the UK. In comparison, the EU has agreed for just over 3,000 tonnes across all 27 member states. Conservative leadership hopeful Liz Truss says she believes there's too much talk that there's going to be a recession. Well, in an interview with The Sun on Sunday, the Foreign Secretary insists that an economic slump is not inevitable, despite warnings from the Bank of England. The central bank cautions the UK could face the largest recession since the 2008 financial crisis due to rising energy prices. If she becomes Prime Minister, Ms Truss plans to introduce immediate tax cuts, which she believes will spur growth of the economy. She's also promising a small business and self-employed revolution. Heavyweight boxer Tyson Fury has called on the government to tackle knife crime after he says his cousin died in an incident last night. Posting on social media, the world champion said knife crime was a pandemic in the UK and he called for higher sentencing for those convicted of carrying a weapon. He also paid tribute to his cousin Rico Burton, wishing him a good place in heaven. The police watchdog is considering whether to investigate Scotland Yard after it emerged officers came into contact with student nurse Awami Davies after she was reported missing. The Met Police says they were called to an address in Croydon on July the 6th due to concerns over a woman's welfare, but she told them she didn't want help, and so they left. The interaction occurred before Essex Police handed the missing person case over to the Met on July 23rd. Ukrainian boxer Alexander Usyk has retained his heavyweight titles over Anthony Joshua in their rematch last night. The Brit was beaten on points in a split decision by judges. Following the loss, Joshua reacted angrily by tossing 2 of Usyk's belts out of the ring before shaking his hand and addressing the crowd with an emotional speech. Joshua later praised the Ukrainian.
I've got to give the man his credit because he's done well. It takes a lot to come up in weight, challenge, win the belt, defend the belt. He's good. He's really, really good. He's been doing it since a young age, had hundreds of amateur fights. He's a real deal. So well done to him. I'm happy for him.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, but now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Tatiana, thanks very much indeed. 7 minutes past 1. Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. Hello and welcome back if you have been with us since we started at 12 o'clock. I am Alastair Stewart, and we are now into the second and final hour of our programme. I will be keeping you company on TV and radio with plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion about strikes. What's the best way forward to break the deadlock? Plus, with a fortnight to go in the Conservative leadership race, we'll be speaking to two MPs, one from the Truss camp and one from the Sunak camp. And on our top story, you have indeed been getting in touch about strike action by the rail workers and other people as well. Tony comes in with, why can we not have a debate on the money that the RMT workers actually get? It's been suggested that the drivers get around £46,000. They're actually members of ASLEF, which is a different union, but I take your point, Tony. There are many that sympathise with their cause, but there are many more who couldn't even dream of such a high salary. Interesting. Don says striking did the mining industry a lot of good, as with Southampton Docks and the British car industry, plus many more, all shut down. Actually, Southampton Dock's still doing very well, but mainly as a container port these days. Don goes on to say, how can the mail workers demand more wages when they are losing £1 million a day? How can Unite not put forward to their members the generous pay offer, says Don, made by Felixstowe Docks, point that Charles Ray made earlier on when we were talking. Let's not look after investors and see what happens. And finally, Brian, interesting one, the majority of businesses in the UK are small businesses. These businesses are struggling. The owners and management are not on hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. Neither are their workers. The only thing the rail strikes are going to do is hurt them and possibly cause some of them to collapse, sending more people into deeper poverty. So keep them coming, and we'll try and find time before the programme finishes to share some more of them back with you. Now, listening to those that I just read out was Charles Ray, who's joining me again back live in the studio. Thanks for coming back, Charles. Particularly the one that Don makes, because we did talk a little bit about that. Striking in the mining industry, a lot of good that did, Southampton Docks, car industry and what have you. And again, in the 80s, there were a lot of industries that we reported on that are no more.
And you've got to remember, the miners were the commandos of the trade union movement. They were all powerful. They brought down a Heath government when Heath said, I'm calling an election to decide who rules the country. Well, clearly the country decided, he didn't. And so they were totally powerful. And many unions, it has to be said, sailed in on the back of the miners. And it was Thatcher who took them on. And Arthur Scargill played right into her hands, and there is no mines anymore. We have no steelworks anymore. We have no printing industry anymore, coupled with the fact we have now new technology or bringing in imports.
The other thing, and we touched upon it a little bit when Steve Headley was with us earlier, there's also no legal secondary picketing either.
No.
There's no. I remember standing up in court with when the print workers came out in support of the nurses. That was the other thing that Thatcher changed, and both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have put finishing, as it were, the trade union legislation reforms firmly on their agendas.
Well, it is. There is no secondary picketing anymore. And I vividly remember at The Sun when we, the journalists, went on strike and we asked the printers, to back us up, and they were saying to us, well, no, we came out for the nurses last week, we came out for so-and-so, we can't do it. This is our own, this was our own industry. Yeah. So it's changed dramatically over the years.
I'm going to bring on a friend to join in the conversation. I'm delighted to say that we are joined now by Alan Jones. Alan is the industrial correspondent for PA Media. For those of you who are not in the same trade as we are, PA is the Press Association. It's the kind of wholesaler of news. They put out stories, they cover all sorts of stuff, so that the rest of us who write it up can have a very good and reliable source, which is called the Press Association. Alan's also written for The Guardian, The Daily Mirror, The Sunday Mirror, The Independent and Huffington Post. So it's across a broad spectrum. Alan, good of you to find time for us. Steve Headley, who I just mentioned to Charles, was here early on, and he said one of the big problems is actually getting an honest and straight reportage of what's going on. And as one of my tweeters just said, how much do the rail workers really earn? Are the media as opposed to this group of strikers as they were in the 1980s?
I mean, I'd say generally unions have not had a decent press for a very, very long time. It's been interesting, the rail dispute. You know, the public opinion has changed. You know, back in the day, if there was a rail strike, a lot of people were very angry about the unions, complaining about their money, you know, all the disruption that's been caused. But this time there's been a lot of support actually for the rail workers, I think, because lots of other workers are in the same position. You know, they come through the pandemic expecting a pay rise, and they're faced with this, you know, out of control inflation now, which is what's driving most of these disputes. And I actually think Mick Lynch from the RMT has made a bit of a difference. You know, he's been a complete media star. He's gone on every program he's been asked to go on. You know, he's very straight, honest, laconic, good sense of humor. And I think he's changed a lot of attitudes in parts of the media. But I mean, I would say generally, you know, a lot of the media is still not very sympathetic to strikes.
Yeah. The second point, which Steve and Charles and I talked about at noon, is the degree to which we may be looking at another winter of discontent. And Charles said, well, certainly an autumn and a late summer of discontent. But given your years of experience in covering these matters, do you get a sense that this one is more coordinated, or is it coincidental that you've got the rail workers, you've got the dockers at Felixstowe, you've got post office workers, etc., etc., etc.? What's your sense?
I mean, I don't think it's coordinated. You know, the only thing which is coordinating it is the rate of inflation. There's nobody in the back room of the TUC saying, right, it's your turn to go on strike next, it's your turn to go on strike next. You know, you've just had pictures of barristers there on strike, you know, for goodness sake. We could be seeing nurses on picket lines soon, teachers, civil servants. You know, no, it's not being coordinated. And I kind of don't use that phrase, summer of discontent. It's a bit of a hackneyed phrase. It goes back a long way, as you've said. One of the rail union leaders I talked to recently described it as a summer of solidarity, which I think explains it a lot more. You know, I think a lot of workers have seen what big unions like the RMT, the CWU, Unite, Unison are doing, and maybe take a bit of heart from that and think, well, okay, if they're going to go on strike and get a pay rise, then we'll do the same thing.
I think, Charles, that's an absolutely fascinating point. About
It is
simply the cost of living, which we are all enduring, is what's the glue.
It's everybody. Everybody is facing the same problems, the cost of living. Whether you're a union member or not a union member, we're facing all the same problems. We're all going to have higher electricity bills to pay. We're all going to be paying more for our groceries in the shops. We're already paying way, way over the odds for our petrol. And can I just say how nice it is to see Alan and hear Alan again after all these years. He was a good lad.
Well, you can indeed, and he will have heard that, which is lovely. And there he is back again. Alan, the other thing that has so fundamentally changed from when all three of us were doing earlier strikes and earlier disputes is the lack of willingness to arbitrate, to compromise. Blunt question, is that because the cost of living crisis is so sharp, or that people like Mick Lynch, who you mentioned and we showed some pictures of just a moment ago, are so determined that they think they're on a winner, they don't have to compromise, they don't have to go to ACAS?
No, I mean, most disputes are still resolved. ACAS still resolve disputes every day. And I think what is different about the rail dispute in particular is, you know, the government's involvement, or rather the lack of government involvement. There's been progress made between the rail unions and in Scotland because the Scottish government has been involved. There's been progress made in Wales because the Welsh government has been involved. There's absolutely no progress being made at all in England because Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, refuses to get involved. He said it's nothing to do with him. You know, terms and conditions should be negotiated between the unions and the employers. And the unions now just cannot understand why he's continuing with that stance because, I mean, the government control most of the money now for the railways. So, you know, that's one way. Something quite big has got to happen with the rail disputes. You know, the unions have got to change their tack, the employers have got to change their tack, or the government has got to get involved. And I think it's looking increasingly to a lot of people following this that the governments are going to have to get involved if we're going to avoid an autumn, winter, you name it, really, of rail strikes.
Charles?
I agree with Alan. And just going back to one point he said earlier on about Mick Lynch, the fact that he is such a charismatic character does help the people supporting the RMT, because he's not like some of the old war horses of the past. But again, Alan is also right. As we said earlier on, the government has got to get involved. The problem they've got at the moment is they're leaderless. They don't have anybody as Prime Minister yet. It's going to be at least another 2 weeks before we get either Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss in. One can only hope that they will get in there, batter heads on their own side and say, look, let's get this sorted, because it's not hurting people as much as, say, the 70s, but it's still hurting people. You mentioned earlier on in your introduction, when people get affected by taking their children to football matches or going out on pleasure or even going to an airport to fly away for a well-deserved holiday and they're getting hit. That is real problems.
What about, Alan, the Labour Party as well? Because they have got a leader in Sir Keir Starmer, but they are quite sharply divided within the parliamentary party, left and right. And Starmer says to his top team, you may not go on these picket lines. It's not what we want to be seen to be doing. And quite a few of them say, blow that, I'm going anyway. And an awful lot of the ordinary members of the Parliamentary Labour Party are right there, all over social media and on the telly. Big problem for Labour.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why it's turned into a big problem for Labour, but it is. You're quite right. Sir Keir Starmer made it clear he didn't want members of the shadow cabinet on RMT picket lines. You know, it's partly that the RMT isn't affiliated to the Labour Party, but he's also been saying, you know, the Labour wants to become a party of government rather than a party of protest. That's been his line. Sure. As you say, loads of MPs have been on picket lines. The Shadow Rail Minister, Sam Tarry, was sacked for going on a picket line. And it'll be really interesting to see what happens if the nurses do go on strike and if there are nurses on picket lines. You know, is Keir Starmer going to say, we're not going to stand alongside nurses, we're not going to stand alongside teachers, we're not going to stand alongside civil servants? You know, that is one of the many, many interesting things that I think is going to happen in the coming months.
Final question to both of you, and I'll stick with you, Alan, if I may, and then get a final take on it from Charles, because it was you who said just a few moments ago, and quite rightly, historically, most major disputes finally end in some form of give and take, some form of arbitration or negotiation, what it might be. How do you think this one, particularly in the transport sector, the dockers and the railways, how do you think this one's going to end?
I mean, I think the Felixstowe one will end probably with a better pay offer. You know, that is purely about pay. You know, and it's fascinating. The company is saying they've offered between 8 and 9.5%. Blimey, you know, years ago, that would have settled any dispute.
Sure. And actually, just to butt in, as Charles said at 12 o'clock as well, 500 of them have already accepted it anyway. So there's a slight division amongst the dockers.
They're a different group. I think they're a slightly higher paid group. Yeah. So yes, they have accepted, but nonetheless, that level of offer would have been accepted in most, if not all, disputes. And again, I get back to the rate of inflation. You know, it just shows you how the rate of inflation is driving these things. As for the rail dispute, you know, as I said, one of three things has got to happen. The rail unions are going to have to start saying, OK, we'll agree to all these changes to terms and conditions, which is what the companies want. Or the companies will have to say, OK, we'll give you this pay rise, then we'll start talking about terms and conditions. Or the government will have to step in and say, look, this is ridiculous. You know, we've got this amount of money, put that on the table. But I have to say, I don't see any of those things happening. You know, and there'll be more strikes called in a couple of weeks. There's more ballot results next week. ASLEF, the drivers' union, is announcing more ballot results next week. I think this is going to be a really long one.
Well, on those rather sombre words, I say thank you, Alan Jones. Great to see you again, and thank you very much for finding time for us this Sunday afternoon. Final word, they were chilling words, but they didn't contradict a single thing that you said. And our other guest earlier on, Steve Headley from the RMT, the rail union, saying it's not going to stop until there is more on the table, one of the three options that Alan just spelled out.
The Felixstowe dispute, the dockers, that will get settled. As Alan quite rightly says, there'll be an increased offer and they'll take it. But he's laid out three options, none of which at the moment look as anywhere near is going to happen. As he says, we're going to have more strikes, we're going to have ASLEF back out again. So it's a quandary, and I understand they are fighting for more pay because of the cost of living. But then again, we're all suffering from the cost of living. There isn't anybody who is escaping this. it's just a question of how you solve it. And I suspect probably at the end of the day that somewhere along the line the government will have to get involved.
We shall watch it. Thank you so much, Charles, for being here at noon and again at 1 o'clock with Steve Headley at noon and with the excellent Alan Jones from PA there just now. Always good to see you.
And you.
Who knows? We may be talking about the royal family next time, but you are always welcome back, as you know. Charles Ray, my good friend, former industrial correspondent at The Sun, and meeting there just a moment ago. Alan Jones, industrial correspondent for PA Media. We have plenty more to come with, what is it now? It's 22 minutes past 1. This afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, we'll be discussing the leakage of sewage into our beaches and our coastlines. But first, let's bring up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking dry for many, although cloud and rain begins to move into the southwest. Let's take a look at the details. It will be a better afternoon across Scotland than yesterday, with a mix of sunny spells and some scattered showers, especially in the north and west. Winds will also be lighter. Northern Ireland also having a fine afternoon, with much of the country dry with some spells of sunshine and just the odd shower. The best of the sunshine this afternoon, though, will be across northern England, although the odd light shower can't be ruled out across the Pennines. Wales, on the other hand, will be rather cloudy and grey with some outbreaks of rain, especially in the south. It will also be rather murky around the south coast, but with feeling increasingly humid. The Midlands will see a mix of sunshine and a few showers, especially across the north. Skies in the south, on the other hand, will turn increasingly hazy with highs of 23 Celsius. Much of East Anglia, though, will have a dry afternoon with some decent spells of sunshine. The sunshine may be hazy at times, but it will be feeling warm. Southeast England also having a dry afternoon, but further west, it will be increasingly cloudy and humid with some patchy rain moving into the southwest throughout the afternoon. This evening, we'll then see cloud and rain in the southwest spread northeastward, but much of the north remaining dry, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. The time is 26 and a half minutes past 1. and we have just over half an hour still to go. Now, first the heat and then the drought, then flash floodings and storms, and now news that many beaches and rivers across the United Kingdom are no longer safe for swimmers due to the amount of raw sewage that's being pumped into the sea. Now, the Environment Agency has called on the water companies to sort it out, or they could face jail. Well, today we've been checking in with our southwest of England reporter Jeff Moody, who is at a beach in Gosport in Hampshire, my neck of the woods, where swimmers are being urged not to enter the water and not a soul over your shoulder either side. This is dreadful.
There isn't a soul over my shoulder. Well, there is actually. There are a couple of people over there. You can't actually see them. And I must admit, I've been here since 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock this morning. And about 8 o'clock this morning, a whole plethora of people came down the sandbank here and went out into the sea. So people are sort of ignoring the advice, if I'm honest. This is one of the worst areas, the worst hit areas, Gosport. But to be honest with you, Alistair, I could have picked anywhere from Hastings in the east right through to Land's End in the west, and I could have gone right around the coast up to Cumbria as well. The problem is pretty much universal. Underneath my feet, you can't see it now because the tide's in, but underneath my feet there is a pipe that leads out to the sea, and that's what has been leaking all of this sewage into the waters. Now, the water companies are very quick to remind us that 95% of this outage, as they call it, is in fact rainwater. But it's the 5% that we need to be more concerned about. All sorts of diseases you can catch if you come into contact with raw sewage, salmonella, hepatitis A, and E. coli as well. So it's certainly not good news if you do come into contact with them. The water companies, of course, have been explaining why this has happened. They've been saying it's due to these remarkable weather conditions we've had. We saw a very, very hot, dry summer, a heat wave, as we know. The ground became rock solid in places, and then, of course, when the rains came, they couldn't sort of dissolve away into the porous ground like they normally do. It's all been sitting on the surface and clogging up the drains that simply can't cope, because a lot of the drains in this country are still Victorian sewers that haven't really been updated since the turn of the last century. Water companies coming under huge fire, of course, for this, mainly because of the salaries that they're paying some of their senior directors, whilst at the same time not coping with all of the leaks that we've been seeing, billions of gallons being leaked every day, and of course not repairing significantly these Victorian sewers that are causing the problems here. But they've also enraged people here over the last few days by saying, look, exercise your judgment. Now, I'm all for exercising your judgment, but how can you tell? I mean, the sea in Britain always looks like this. It always looks a little bit murky, doesn't it? It's a reflection of the sky, which is very rarely blue. Certainly isn't at the moment. But so a lot of swimmers are saying, how on earth can we tell? I spoke to a few of them earlier on today. This is why they told me they're still swimming.
Well, we do watch the apps and what Southern Water are putting online, and we were going to come Thursday, weren't we?
Oh yeah, that was a
And they
definite
said
no.
it had just been dumped in. We were like, okay, so we have left it a couple of days, so now we're hoping that it's okay. Yeah.
What do you think about the fact that so much raw sewage has been dumped into our seas every year?
It's disgusting.
It's
Absolutely
heartbreaking.
disgusting. Yeah. Yeah, and especially when they do it on days when there's been no heavy rainfall, because I believe they're supposed to do it when it's like a bit of an overflow from all the rain, and yet they're still doing it, and we haven't had any really.
That's the British way, isn't it, Alistair, really? We don't listen to what people tell us to do, we just get on and do it, even if there's raw sewage.
Well, there you go. And I tell you what, Southern Water have got a real problem because Hampshire was also one of the first places to impose a hosepipe ban, and those restrictions are still there. Big agenda for reform. Jeff, great to see you as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining us there live from Gosport in Hampshire. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come in the final half hour of the programme. Next up, we'll be discussing how young people can save money as they move out of home and head off to university, and we will also be bringing you right up to date with the election to be the next leader of the Conservative Party and our next Prime Minister. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news headlines.
Thank you, Alistair. It's 1:31. I am Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. For the first time in 3 decades, dock workers at Britain's busiest port have gone on strike in a dispute over pay. Nearly 2,000 union members at Felixstowe in Suffolk are walking out for 8 days. The port handles nearly half of all container freight that travels into Britain. Barristers are voting on plans for an all-out strike next month in a row with the government over jobs and pay. Members of the Criminal Bar Association have already been walking out on alternate weeks in England and Wales. They're now deciding on whether to take uninterrupted industrial action that would start on the 5th of September. Heavyweight boxer Tyson Fury has called on the government to tackle knife crime after he says his cousin died in an incident last night. Posting on social media, the world champion said knife crime was a pandemic in the UK, and he called for higher sentencing for those convicted of carrying a weapon. He also paid tribute to his cousin Rico Burton, wishing him a good place in heaven. The police watchdog is considering whether to investigate Scotland Yard after it emerged officers came into contact with student nurse Owami Davies after she was reported missing. The Met says they were called to an address in Croydon on July the 6th due to concerns over a woman's welfare, but she told them she didn't want help, and so they left. The interaction occurred before Essex police handed the missing person case over to the Met on July the 23rd. Ukrainian boxer Alexander Usyk has retained his heavyweight titles over Anthony Joshua in their rematch last night. The Brit was beaten on points in a split decision by judges. Following the loss, Joshua reacted angrily by tossing 2 of Usyk's belts out of the ring before shaking his hand and addressing the crowd with an emotional speech. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and Friends.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 24 minutes to 2, and you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News. Now, moving our attentions onto the cost of living crisis that we talked a lot about in the context of trade unions and strikes. This weekend, many families will be preparing to send their loved ones, their children, off to university or college at the end of the summer. And for lots of young people, it'll be the first time that they enter the world of budgeting and financial responsibility, which is made even more daunting by, of course, the cost of living crisis. So, what are the best tips for those young people and tricks for managing your limited money whilst you're at university or college, or perhaps for some, with A-levels under their belt, starting their very first job? I'm delighted to say that joining me now to shed light upon this is our personal finance expert and the founder of MoneyMagpie.com. There she is, Jasmine Birtles. Good to see you, Jasmine. They're on the first rung, either of the earning ladder, or they're off to college on a very, very limited budget. Do they matter in the market out there?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, students are very much sought after by a number of businesses, including, of course, banks. Hence why a lot of the banks are offering all sorts of sweeteners to get some of the students into joining them. Right now, for example, HSBC is offering £100 plus very good overdraft facilities. Same with Nationwide, £100 to come and join them. The idea, I think, is that once they get them, and their overdrafts, they've got them for quite a while. So there are a number of banks that are offering all sorts of things, money primarily, but there's also the travel card, the £70 young person's travel card, which lasts for 3 years, which again is worth having. But yeah, they're definitely going for the students.
I remember years ago when I went to university in the 70s, I made the mistake of discovering credit cards. And although I was studying economics, I didn't really have my head around the notion of an overdraft and how quickly the costs kick in. So heads up, checklist that you want to put into the heads of undergraduates and college students who are going, 100 quid, that's lovely jubbly, but what have they got to be very careful about?
Well, it's getting too excited, as you say, about having a lump of money given to you and having, credit cards, as you say, because, it's like putting sharp knives in children's hands. It's great. Credit is great as long as you know what you're doing with it, but it can absolutely mess you up if you don't. So number one, I'd say pace yourself. Have a look at how many months, how many weeks you're going to have to make this money last. Divide that money, that money by the number of weeks, and that's how much you can spend each week. Once you have paid the basic bills, so you've got rent, work out how much you'll have to have on food. Insurance, that's an important one, actually, for students that they often forget. And then having a little bit of fun, just a little bit.
But we've talked about this so many times. In that sense, it's no different to you or to me. Whatever income we are lucky enough to enjoy, you've still got to think rent, heating, light. And yes. With the students, it's not all booze and it's not all books. It's balance.
Well, absolutely. And the other good thing, I think, for all of us, certainly for students, is that there are ways to make a bit of extra cash on the side. Now, with students, quite often the universities, the colleges themselves offer some money-making opportunities. Quite often it's phoning up alumni to try and get some cash off them. But also, when I was at university, I found that there were various little competitions that you could go in for to get some money. I think I went in for a public speaking competition. That was good. And also, some departments have little jobs that you can do. Again, when I was at university, I did bits and pieces for the psychology department. It was a tenner a time, but I was grateful for a tenner,
Yeah,
frankly.
absolutely. Yeah.
And it was sort of doing these little tests to see if you could remember things. So there are all of those. Plus, though, with the online side, there are apps like Skedaddle, where you can make £2 a day by playing games while you're on transport. There's referralcodes.com, where you can put referral codes for free on a page there, and other people can use them, and they save money and you make money. All of these sort of things on the side that you could potentially do for little bits of cash here and there, and it really helps.
I bet it does. Don't do it during the lectures and during the tutorials, though, because they'll get very cross with you. Sound advice, Jasmine. Lovely to see you. Thank you very much indeed for breaking into your Sunday to be with us. That's Jasmine Buttles there. And don't forget, you can go to moneymagpie.com, and there's lots more advice and guidance there from a good friend of ours and one of the real authorities. Jasmine Buttles, founder of moneymagpie.com. Now, at 20 minutes to 2, we're going to finish with a look at the Conservative leadership race with a fortnight to go. And I'm genuinely delighted to be joined by voices from both candidates' camps. First up is the former Education Secretary Michelle Donnellan, MP, who is a Liz Truss backer. Good to see you. Sir Graham Brady, chair of the 22 committee, told us up in Manchester on Thursday when we were doing the hustings that he'd feared it would drag on for too long, but he was surprised to see that there were still votes to play for, that hundreds were still turning up for the hustings. Let me just play it to you, Michelle, and then I'll come back to you with a question. Because time as it goes, it was Sir Graham talking to Tom, saying exactly what I've just said. But here's my question to you, Michelle, from the Truss camp. Does the fact that there's still quite a bit to play for worry you? Have we lost Michelle?
And who wins? I'm here. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. We couldn't play the bit of Graham Brady to you, for which I apologise. Our problem, not yours. But my question to you remains the same. What Graham is saying, there's still much to play for. There are votes out there that are as yet undecided. You're in the lead in your camp, but does it worry you that there is still so much to play for?
No, absolutely. Throughout this entire process, Liz has never been complacent. There is only one poll that matters, and that is going to determine who becomes the next Prime Minister. And that's why she's been consistent throughout this with her vision and with her approach that she would take if she was the next Prime Minister. I'm confident that members will agree with me and recognise that her no-nonsense, can-do attitude that is proven, having worked across 6 different departments, and the fact that she's also got the Conservative principles behind her, and she wants to address every single problem with real Conservative solutions, will stand her in good stead, and she will win in the next few weeks. But we're certainly not being complacent.
What was your personal reaction, and if you're willing to share it, your friend Liz's reaction, when Michael Gove really gave her a broadside in the papers a couple of days ago, and then blasts from the past like Matthew Parris, saying that what you see is what you get and it isn't much? I mean, it's pretty brutal stuff from 2 big players within your party.
Well, indeed, but Liz has the majority of members of Parliament backing her. She has them on the left of the party, on the right of the party. She has the majority with cabinet experience, both in the current cabinet and previous cabinets. She's proven herself to be the individual that really can unite the party, and which people are placing their faith in time and time again. And like I said, she has a proven track record, having worked in 6 different departments. She's come up with the goods. Most importantly, she has the policies to mean that tomorrow will be better than today. She's offering hope, not just to Conservative Party members, but to the general public. I've been out canvassing, knocking on doors in Wiltshire across the summer period, and Liz Truss's name is coming up time and time again. She is the one that they want to see in office, the one that they trust to be on their side in what is going to be a very difficult few months.
Yeah, but there's also, in that precise context, a bit of flip-floppery, as it were, that initially it was those tax cuts and help on green levies and national insurance that you and she have spoken a good deal about. But then you've got Kwasi, who is, like you, a supporter of Liz Truss, in the papers this morning, saying, no, actually, there will be handouts, just be a bit patient. Yeah, there's a lack of consistency in your camp.
I don't agree with that at all. I think, if we look at Liz's camp, it's been the most consistent throughout, in fact. What she's always said is that it doesn't make any sense to start with taking people's money away from them and then reallocating it back to them. That's more expensive, more complicated, more drawn out. Actually, it's a better conservative philosophy to lower tax, let people keep as much of their own income as possible from the off, to help them go forward. She's never said that that means that you can't offer additional support on top. What she in fact said from the very beginning was that we would have an emergency budget at the start of her premiership, when she'd be in a position to have access to the books in full and know exactly what she could offer in terms of additional support, because of course she doesn't want to be offering stuff that she can't follow through with. That's a big thing about Liz Truss. She's saying, trust her, she will deliver, she will come up with the goods.
I thought she was also saying earlier that she didn't want to offer stuff that she couldn't afford to, and now suddenly, because it's getting tight, she can afford to. That's a classic flip-floppery.
That's why she hasn't been specific on additional support. She said she will look at that in the round in an emergency budget.
Now, Kwasi is saying there will be.
Yes, exactly. But she hasn't outlined lots of different pots of funding, because she said she's going to do that comprehensively and professionally and in the right way by an emergency budget. But the standing principle still is in place that actually how you start is by giving people as much of their own money in the first place. It's ludicrous to say that the government should be taking money away from them, then reallocating it and siphoning it back to them and claiming that the government has somehow helped them, when actually what we should be doing is allowing people to keep as much of their own money over the coming months to help with these really, really challenging times. And she has never, ever changed her mind on that, because that is a core Conservative principle, I would argue.
OK, as is not borrowing more than you can afford to. And if she is going to cut taxes, reverse the rise in national insurance, cut the green levies, and find what Kwasi has not detailed, I accept that point, but has said will be there, then she's going to have to borrow. That's not very Conservative.
Well, what she has said is that we have 30 billion in headroom already to fund some of that extra additional taxation cuts. Also, if we look at some of the tax cuts that she's promised, it's in relation to corporation tax, which actually hasn't risen yet. So stopping that from happening is easier said than some of the others, easier done than some of the others. And in addition, the other key point here is that we can't tax our way to growth. We need to be able to grow the economy to avoid a recession. And, the alternative is that we will walk blindly into a recession, whereas Liz Truss plans are comprehensive. And the other thing I'd just like to add is, when we had that expensive, comprehensive amount that we spent in World War II, we didn't then rush to pay back that debt straight away, did we? No, we put it on a long-term footing. And that's exactly what we should be doing with the pandemic. It was a once-in-a-100-year event. We can't be crippling families to pay that back within the next year or two. That will be irresponsible in my mind.
Final quick one, Michelle, if you'd be so kind, because I want to give Bob the same amount of time as I've given to you. If she wins, and I do accept your caveats, how good a peacemaker will she be with the wings of the party, those that are against her at the moment and those who think that she's not up to the job? How good a peacemaker is she?
Well, whoever wins, the party has to come back together, but I think it has the best chance of being able to do that under Liz Truss. As I said before, the majority of MPs are backing her on all wings of the party in terms of all seniority and all locations up and down the country, and facing Liberal seats, facing Labour-facing seats. She is the individual that can unite the party and then go on and, most importantly, win the next general election, and poll after poll shows that.
All right, Michelle Donlan, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for breaking into your Sunday afternoon to join us here on GB News. Michelle Donlan there, Liz Truss supporter, former Education Secretary and Member of Parliament for Chippenham. Now, let's bring in another old friend of mine who is a regular on this programme, I am honoured to say, and that is Sir Bob Neill, MP, who is a Rishi Sunak supporter. Bob, very good to see you, as always. I'm going to put exactly the same question to you as I did to Michelle to get the ball rolling, and that was when I was up in Manchester for the hustings. Sir Graham Brady said, I thought maybe the contest was going on a bit too long, but look at these numbers, look at the numbers who are undecided. It's right that this should run. Michelle says that doesn't make the Truss camp complacent. Does it make the Sunak camp a little more optimistic?
Well, good to see you again, Alistair, for a start. Great to be on again. We've always been optimistic, and we're always being positive about it, Alistair. I think it actually confirms what we have been finding all along, which is exactly as you say, that an awful lot of people haven't voted yet. Far more are undecided than the polls suggest, and certainly the feedback that we get, both from polling and indeed from the conversations that we're having. And Rishi is meeting people around the country, I think, to an unprecedented degree, is that when people hear him, they are persuaded that actually those undecideds are breaking clearly in Rishi's favour. So I think the momentum is actually going to go our way at the end of the day, because the key message is the message actually that you can only protect people's money if you protect the value of the money, that you'll only take the country with you if you're honest with them about the circumstances and the challenges that confront us. That optimism is great, but it's got to be based upon reality and upon facts. I think that message is cutting through. It's cutting through members, and in particular, it's cutting through with ordinary voters. And they actually are the people we need to think about. Because it's not just the 166,000 odd Conservative members that have got to be persuaded. That's the first stage. You've also got to choose the candidate who cuts through best and polls best with the voters at large. And that's where Rishi scores better in the polls.
You have always used a straight bat in conversations that I've had with you over many, many years, and I'm going to put this to you quite bluntly. I agree with you, funnily enough, that the Sunak proposition is much more Thatcherite, because I was there reporting on what Margaret did and what Geoffrey Howe did in those first 2 or 3 budgets. But here's the point, Bob. Hasn't Rishi misread the room on the cost of living crisis? He's right in terms of the economic theory and the political history of it, but people are in pain right now. And direct aid, even if it's not the right theoretical thing to do, is the right thing to do in terms of your wallet and mine.
Well, in fact, I think Rishi Alistair is precisely meeting that point, because his case has been that unfunded tax cuts are not the answer. For example, reducing corporation tax doesn't in fact help the majority of small firms. It benefits the most successful and largest firms, won't affect the SMEs, who are the ones being hit the most by the increase in energy costs. So targeting it is absolutely right. But the point is this: Rishi has already set out proposals for that targeted assistance. A track record, as we all know, from during the furlough and during the lockdown, when he actually delivered a whole programme of support. So he's shown he can do that and target it. And we're proposing to do that again. Yeah, but the key thing is, if broad tax cuts actually aren't going to help people. The amount that people get back, for example, by cancelling national insurance increase would be lost by the increase that they've got in their energy bills.
Yeah, as you were just...
And don't drive inflation up. That's the big thing.
Understood completely. And just as you were giving that answer there, we were playing pictures for those who are listening to our conversation on radio rather than television of the Manchester hustings. And at the Manchester hustings, they were both very interesting on the size of the state and the amount that government and the state takes out of gross domestic product. And Rishi particularly was very strong on that in his May's lecture, which if folk haven't seen it, should look it up. It really, really is important. And he said to me in Manchester, he repeated the line, these levels of public expenditure must not become the new post-COVID norm. And yet he is also on record as saying the help that he will give people to get through the cost of living crisis is going to need more borrowing. You can't have it both ways, Bob.
I think what you've got to do, distinguish, and to this extent, I take an analogy to Michelle's point, but put it differently, is that short-term borrowing is inevitably going to be necessary. And it's going to be necessary to deal with that cost of living crisis, which is real and immediate. But that is different to a long-term commitment to borrowing. And that, I think, is the problem with Liz's programme, that essentially you're looking at tax cuts of up to 40, 50 billion pounds. That's money that's not yet funded, plus commitments to something like 50% extra on defence spending, more money into universities and other areas, all worthy things, but we don't have a sense as to where that's coming from. That's either long-term as opposed to short-term borrowing, which, of course, more long-term borrowing adds to pressure on inflation, or it's cuts in public spending elsewhere. Now, the commitments, as far as I can see, that have been put forward from Liz's side will be about the same as the budgets for the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice combined. Now, where's that going to come from? I don't think that's realistic. The alternative, of course, with borrowing is that pushes up interest rates. And you and I remember in the 70s the importance that Margaret Thatcher stressed on the home-owning democracy. Think of the impact of 7% interest rates, £585 odd on the average mortgage. That will be crippling. So that's why I say that Rishi's right. For a short term, for the distance, but in the medium and long term, you've then got to actually be keeping inflation under control before you then move on to the next stage.
I've got 30 seconds and literally no more to offer you for the final answer to this question. If Rishi wins, how good a peacemaker, bridge builder will he be?
I believe a very good one. I think he showed that when he was Chancellor. He worked very collaboratively with MPs right across the board. His support comes right across the party. People from, whether they were Leavers, Remainers in the old days, left, right, or whatever axis you like to use. And above all, he's an empathetic character. And I think people get that. The ability to communicate and to have that warm approach is something that's going to be really important for the party.
Bob Neal.
And I think for the voters as well.
Great to talk to you and have a lovely Sunday afternoon. Thank you very much indeed, my friend. Bob Neal MP there backing Rishi Sunak, following Michelle Donnellan backing Liz Truss. That's all we have time for today, indeed for this weekend. But I will be back next weekend from 12 till 2, and I'll also be here on Friday. So thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day from all of us. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking dry for many, although cloud and rain begins to move into the southwest. Let's take a look at the details. It will be a better afternoon across Scotland than yesterday, with a mix of sunny spells and some scattered showers, especially in the north and west. Winds will also be lighter. Northern Ireland also having a fine afternoon, with much of the country dry with some spells of sunshine and just the odd shower. The best of the sunshine this afternoon, though, will be across northern England, although the odd light shower can't be ruled out across the Pennines. Wales, on the other hand, will be rather cloudy and grey with some outbreaks of rain, especially in the south. It will also be rather murky around the south coast, but with feeling increasingly humid. The Midlands will see a mix of sunshine and a few showers, especially across the north. Skies in the south, on the other hand, will turn increasingly hazy with highs of 23 Celsius. Much of East Anglia, though, will have a dry afternoon with some decent spells of sunshine. The sunshine may be hazy at times, but it will be feeling warm. South East England also having a dry afternoon, but further west, it will be increasingly cloudy and humid with some patchy rain moving into the southwest throughout the afternoon. This evening, we'll then see cloud and rain in the southwest spread northeastward, but much of the north remaining dry. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness, man.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints over a drink. We have a civilised conversation.